Hello, everyone. I, like you and most of the world, I think in the last 12 days now, since October 7th, have been paying close attention to what's going on in Israel ever since that surprise attack by Hamas on the early hours of October 7th, when the massacre was made against the Israelis, and what has ensued against them, what's going on now in the Gaza Strip. And the whole world is watching, and Christians are paying particular attention, wondering what does this have to say about a Bible prophecy, end times. We're around the world, Christians I meet everywhere, and Christians I'm talking to from different countries. We are ready. We are listening for that trumpet sound, aren't we, as we watch things line up. And in regard to what's happening to Israel, I was thinking first, my mind was going back to the time of World War II, and reports come in from that time. It's understandable. So many people thought maybe this is the beginning of tribulation, even at that time, or certainly a great sign of the second return of Jesus, because of what was happening when the Jews were being rounded up by the hundreds of thousands and sent to concentration camps. So it's understandable when such an atrocity was happening that one might think, well, at that time, is this the beginning of tribulation? It was not. And in fact, one thing that had to happen, which wasn't happening at that time, it wasn't just the mere persecution of Jewish people that they looked at as a sign, but something most significant happened right after World War II, and that took place in 1948. And that, of course, is when Israel became a recognized nation once again. In Ezekiel 36:24, we read, "For I will take you out of the nations, I will gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you back into your own land." I also let me read to you from Ezekiel 38. This is a promise of God, beginning with verse 1. "This is another message that came from the Lord. Son of man, turn and face Gog of the land of Magog, the prince who rules over the nations of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him." Let's look at that again. "Son of man, turn and face Gog." Who is Gog? Gog is a person. Gog is a prince of the land of Magog. What is Magog? You might remember that today Magog is Russia. And if we are indeed coming to the time of tribulation, then Gog has to be Vladimir Putin. He has to be the prince, the leader of Russia. He rules over the nations of Meshech and Tubal. At this time, during the times of Ezekiel, this would now be known today, Meshech as the area of Moscow and Tubal as the area of Siberia. He says, verse 3, "Give him this message from the sovereign Lord, Gog, I am your enemy. I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws to lead you out with your whole army, your horses and chariots in full armor, and a great horde armed with shields and swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya will join you too with their weapons." Now, this is interesting. This is interesting to me and just what has happened in the last 12 days. Okay, we see, geographically, we see Israel, and they are surrounded by Muslim enemies. You have the war going on right now in the Gaza Strip. Just a bit further north, you have skirmishes now happening in the West Bank. And now just yesterday and today, you've seen on the news Lebanon, which borders Israel on the north. There's great skirmishes going on there. Just next to Lebanon is the country of Syria, and a part of their country also borders Israel. You see, it is surrounded by its enemies. Now, just a few days ago, did you read or hear on the news that Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, went to Syria to talk to President Bashar al-Assad concerning Israel? Now, what did they say? What did they conclude? What did they advise? We don't know. Did you also hear that Vladimir Putin has offered to negotiate between Iran and Israel? I kind of had to chuckle at that one, as if that could ever happen. Iran, as we know, they're people, they hate Israel with a passion. You probably remember, you're aware that their president, Ephraim Raisi of Iran, he has more than once openly declared that their greatest joy would be to see the complete annihilation of Israel. Although they don't use the word Israel because they don't recognize Israel as a country, they always refer to them as the Zionist regime. The Zionist regime, who are according to them, they are illegally inhabiting that part of the land. Now, there's something, my thoughts are going here and there. There's something else coming to mind. We know, as we just read here, let me just point that out again. It says in verse 5 of Ezekiel 38, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, you will all join too. Now we know from reading other places in Revelation that during the time of Armageddon, which will take place in the second half of the tribulation, tribulation is 7 years, in the second half, there will be kings from the south coming, and then from the north, led by Gog, which, if this is about to happen soon, that is Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, has been making, he's become bed partners with China, and he's offered himself to negotiate with Iran. And Iran and Russia have been, they exchange weapons at times. They have other trade deals. So they're in cahoots together. Do you see how even now as we speak, we watch the news, that according to Scripture and what's going to happen during the time of tribulation, it's like the countries are on a chessboard of biblical prophecy, and they are all lining up. The stage is being set. I wanted to point this out here too. Do you recall, and this is what I'm going to call a Thus Wonders Vicky moment. You know, I have those moments. So I don't know. I'm just wondering, perhaps you're wondering as well. It's to do with a few weeks ago, the hostage exchange between Iran and the United States, when in exchange for hostages, the United States would release $6 billion back to Iran. That evidently is being held by the country of Qatar, Q-U-A-T-A-R, Qatar, negotiating between United States and Iran for this money. Now, according this week, when he was in Israel, Secretary of State Blinken of the United States, he said, when asked about this, he said, oh, that $6 million, none of it has gone to Iran yet. Now, when Lester Holt, he is an American news anchor doing the evening news on NBC in America, and just a few weeks ago, he had a one-on-one interview with the president of Iran, Ephraim Raisi. And he asked him, Lester Holt asked about this $6 billion, and he reminded the president that this is only to be used for humanitarian aid and will only be released to you for humanitarian aid works. And President Raisi answered, he said, this money belongs to Iran, and it will be used to the good of the Iran people. Now, that is exactly what he said. This will be used to the good of the Iran people. But now what's the good of the Iran people, according to President Ephraim Raisi? Well, he's already said it before. His greatest joy, and the greatest joy of the country of Iran, in his opinion, would be the complete annihilation of Israel. Now, he gets this $6 billion. The United States says they don't have it yet, but now here's where my wondering comes in. They are such an enemy of the United States, which they refer to as the Great White Satan. They so hate and distrust America. Are they really going to say, okay, I'll give you the hostages, and yes, we can wait for the money to come? Do you know, I've got huge doubts about that. I think they'd want to see some cash in their bank account right away, at least some of it. I don't think they would trust. They would not trust, because there's nothing about them that likes America. We, to them, Americans are the Great White Satan. So this is just my wonderings. I can't see that happening. I believe in my heart they've got some of that money, at least some of that $6 billion. And if that is true, that would account for Hamas suddenly getting an arsenal of rockets and other weaponry that would encourage them to make that surprise massacre against the Israelis on the morning of October 7th. Thus Wonders Vicky, do I know that? No, I don't know that. You don't know that. We can't know that. I'm just wondering. It kind of would make sense to me. Now, it's interesting also that this attack came at this time. One, did they get part of the $6 billion that they could buy these weapons? Because Hamas is backed by Iran. We do know that. It comes out of Iran. We know that as a fact. But also, in the last several weeks, did you know this? Some of you won't know, some of you will. United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia have been in diplomatic talks together to get Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel fully as its own country and to begin further diplomatic relations and trade relations with each other. Now, let me read something that President Raisi, Ephraim Raisi of Iran, said, quote, We are against any bilateral relations between our regional countries and the Zionist regime, unquote. Our regional countries. In other words, President Raisi of Iran, he does not want any Arab or Muslim nation in the vicinity of Israel to join in any kind of negotiations with them. Oh no, that is just absolute forbidden to him. He would not want that at all. So do you see again how things are lining up? Now let me read something to you. This is in Daniel 9 and verse 27. Now listen to this. Daniel 9:27, it says this: the ruler will make a treaty with the people for a period of one set of 7. So we know this is the Antichrist and the time of tribulation, which we know is 7 years. But after half that time, 3.5 years, he will put an end to the sacrifices and offerings, and as a climax to all his terrible deeds, he will set up a sacrilegious object that causes desecration until the fate decreed for this defiler is finally poured out on him. Let me read something to you. Revelation 13, starting with verse 11. Let me read this. John is writing, he's seen this vision. I saw another beast come up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like that of a lamb, but he spoke with the voice of a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast, the Antichrist, and he required all the earth and its people to worship the first beast, to worship the Antichrist, whose fatal wound had been healed. This is the false prophet. He's talking about the Antichrist. He did astounding miracles, even making fire flash down to earth from the sky while everyone was watching. See, he fooled them. Oh, Satan is a great deceiver. And with all the miracles he was allowed to perform on behalf of the first beast, he deceived all the people who belonged to this world. Yeah. And he ordered the people to make a great statue of the first beast, the Antichrist, who was fatally wounded, and he came back to life again. He was then permitted to give life to this statue so that it could speak. And then the statue of the Antichrist, the beast, it commanded that anyone refusing to worship it must die. You read on further, and it talks about receiving the mark of the beast, or else they would be killed. And by the way, let me just go, I've referred to this a lot, but it's just so interesting to me. This is Revelation 20 and verse 4. It says, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony about Jesus and for proclaiming the word of God. This is during the time of tribulation, when it will be the world's greatest revival. It will also be the world's greatest tribulation. That's why we call it that, of chaos and calamity and death and sickness and weather disasters and disease. It will just be the most awful time in the history of this world. And there will be evil unleashed in full capacity. And those standing for Jesus Christ will be killed. But it's always interesting to me, it doesn't just say here in Revelation 20, verse 4, it doesn't just say, and many will be killed. It says they will be beheaded. And as I often point out, who is known today to choose beheading as their method of killing, of execution? And that's the Muslim world. In fact, on October 7th, when Hamas came into Israel with their sneak attack, the awful videos showing parents being killed in front of their children, children being killed in front of their parents, and some babies being beheaded, others beheaded. I just find this interesting, because if indeed we are in the end times, and it certainly looks like we are, then just in the last 12 days, we have seen things line up geographically like never before. Israel themselves say that in modern history, they have never had such a terrorist attack before as they are seeing right now. Could we indeed be hearing that trumpet sound soon? I think so. I really think so. And is that not exciting? We are filled with sorrow when we see the casualties of war. When we see on both sides children, Palestinian children, Israeli children, other children caught in war. That is always so sad. It is a terrible sadness, and these things will happen. I want to remind you, let me see if I can find this. It just comes to mind. Yes, Revelation 19. Let me read this to you. I'm going to begin with verse 19. I saw the beast and the kings of the world and their armies gathered together to fight against the one sitting on the horse and his army. This is when Jesus is coming. The beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who did mighty miracles on behalf of the beast, the Antichrist, miracles that deceived everyone who had accepted the mark. Both the beast and the false prophet were thrown alive into the fiery lake. They're going there before Satan himself. And their entire army was killed by the sharp sword that came from the mouth of the one riding the white horse, Jesus. And the vultures all gorged themselves on the dead bodies. Elsewhere in Revelation chapter 14, in verse 20, it says, the blood that flowed was about 180 miles long and as high as a horse's bridle. What we are seeing today is awful. The rockets, the damage, the death, what we are watching on television today in Israel is awful. But can you imagine there coming a time when the Battle of Armageddon, this is more in the north of Israel, takes place, and the death will be such that blood will form a 180-mile-long river up to the bridle of a horse? This is just mind-blowing, is it not? But do you see? See, the rapture can come at any time. It could have come 100 years ago. There are no signs for the rapture, but we do know the rapture takes place before the second coming of Jesus. And before the second coming of Jesus, when he sets up his millennial reign, there has to be this time of 7-year tribulation, 7 years of chaos and evil. And there has to be the aligning of these nations, and we are seeing it happen just in the last 12 days. Voila. Here it is, with Lebanon and Syria, Jordan to the east, Egypt. And then out here you have Gog, Vladimir Putin, if he is indeed the one, and if we are correct in just looking at the nations lining up, Gog, Magog, which is Russia, shaking hands with China, shaking hands with Iran, all hating Israel. Can we not see today political strategy lining up to come against Israel today? That's what is exciting. That's why I encourage everyone, be ready. We do not want to be ashamed at his coming. Make certain you keep your hearts pure, that you keep your mouths ready to point others to Jesus Christ, to tell them, and we could hear that sound any moment. I was talking some weeks ago, just a short conversation with someone who's not yet a Christian, and I said, listen, if one day there's breaking news on television and there's chaos around the world and millions of people have just suddenly disappeared, I said, I will be one of those. I said, and when that happens, will you please consider Jesus Christ? It will be hard, but will you please consider Jesus Christ? Because 7 years of hell on earth is nothing compared to eternity of peace with Jesus Christ. Nothing compares to that. Let me read to you Psalm 122. Do you know we get blessed just for praying for Jerusalem? Psalm 122, verse 6, pray for peace in Jerusalem. May all who love this country prosper. You know, there's been all these offers of peace negotiations going on for Israel. Biden has just been, the Prime Minister of England, Rishi Sunak, is there today. Others have offered their help in wanting to bring peace. And there is going to be someone, very soon I believe, who's going to give peace to Israel, and it's going to be the Antichrist, and the world is going to be astonished. Someone has made peace between the Muslim nations and Israel, and it's a treaty for 7 years, as we know, the Bible clearly tells us, and it will be broken after 3.5 years. We know that because the Bible tells us. And then after the last 3.5 years, Jesus will come, set up his 1,000-year reign on earth, and there will be peace in Israel, and Jesus will sit on the throne in Jerusalem, and we will reign with him. Back to Psalm 122, verse 6, pray for peace in Jerusalem. May all who love this city prosper. O Jerusalem, may there be peace within your walls and prosperity in your palaces. For the sake of my family and friends, I will say, may you have peace. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek what is best for you, O Jerusalem. Pray for Israel. Pray for God's chosen people. You are blessed and prosper in peace and joy just for the doing so. Whew, exciting days. Be ready. we could hear that trumpet sound anytime and pray for Israel. You be blessed. Until next time.